You lie to yourself at times, now you're falling apart. Soon giving in this time, 'cause we're falling apart.
Hello there! Coming to you live from the bunker. This is a special report for JW Watch, the show that keeps a close eye on all things JW, offering Jehovah's Witnesses a more objective viewpoint on current developments that the governing body almost certainly doesn't want them to hear. New light, whether in the form of altered understandings of Bible teachings or adjusted policies, is surely something to which all Jehovah's Witnesses should be alerted. But in reality, that's not always the case. A good example of the secrecy surrounding some organisational changes can be found in a leaked letter that has been shared with JW Watch by a HLC or Hospital Liaison Committee insider. Dated June 15th, 2018, the letter introduced a subtle change to the notorious prohibition on blood. In this programme, I will be examining the document and discussing what it means to rank and file believers who are being kept in the dark. Now my intro is out of the way. I need to explain, I guess, how the policy changed, and I figured the best way to do it, this is honestly not a book plug. It's just that, by coincidence, this change in policy was introduced the year after my book was published, and my book discussed the aspect of the blood policy that this change affected. Make of that what you will. I'm not suggesting anything. Who knows what led to the change? But I'm going to bring up on screen now page 501 of The Reluctant Apostate. You can see there the chapter heading is Blood and Tears. And I'm just going to read to you the relevant part, just so you can get a grasp of what this is all about. As things currently stand, a witness who accepts a blood transfusion will be considered as having disassociated from the faith, in other words, signalled that they no longer consider themselves to be a witness, if they do not express regret for their decision. This is spelled out clearly in the following instructions from pages 111 to 112 of the Shepherd Book, bold in the original. Willingly and unrepentantly taking blood. If someone willingly takes blood, perhaps because of being under extreme pressure, the committee should obtain the facts and determine the individual's attitude. If he is repentant, the committee should provide spiritual assistance in the spirit of Galatians 6 verse 1 and Jude 22 verse 3. I won't read the full quote. You can, I guess, download a recent copy of the Shepherd Book, another item that's not made available to ordinary witnesses. And let me skip to the next paragraph. But before I do that, I just want to quickly check that everything's okay in the live chat and that you can all hear me okay. I'm not seeing any messages suggesting technical problems. In fact, KCA Randy says, "Hello Lloyd, bunker is looking top notch." Thank you very much. There will be a video coming out soon about the bunker because there are some issues with it. But rather than going into details on that, I'll just let you look forward to that video. Anyway, back to the book. Identical instructions for one who willfully and unrepentantly takes a blood transfusion and thereby chooses to reject the scriptural sanctity of blood are found in an even more secretive Watchtower document titled Correspondence Guidelines. These guidelines are issued to key staff at Bethels around the world, especially staff who are responsible for answering letters from elders or rank-and-file witnesses. They contain cookie-cutter responses to a long list of scenarios in which Watchtower doctrine might apply. A 2011 version of the guidelines was leaked by an insider in October 2015. Interestingly, the document advises that there should be no penalties for a doctor or nurse who administers blood to a patient under the instructions of a superior. And then I quote the relevant part: "A Christian who is a nurse or a doctor respects the scriptures and therefore would not recommend or order a blood transfusion for a patient." Interesting how the language, by the way, how they're saying what a Christian would or wouldn't do. Famously, they say that this is all about personal choice, don't they? But we know the reality is very different, and that's evident in the wording. If he or she, as an employee, is not responsible for deciding the matter and is directed by a superior to administer a transfusion to a non-witness, whether to obey is a matter for personal, conscientious decision. So you could, theoretically, according to what we're reading, administer blood to someone so long as it's your job and you're being directed to do it by a superior. So you couldn't be a Jehovah's Witness doctor and recommend it, but you could be, let's say, a doctor or nurse, and a superior orders you to do it and it's your job. And you wouldn't, according to this, and it cites Watchtower articles, one in 1999 and one in 1975 as justification, you wouldn't get into trouble, according to what's written here. This has changed. But let me press on, because there is a little bit of a double standard. However, according to the same document, a witness farmer who allows a blood transfusion for one of his livestock should expect a slapped wrist at the very least. It is not proper for a Christian to administer a blood transfusion to an animal owned by him or to authorize another to do so. Hence, the prohibition on blood even extends into the animal kingdom, despite the fact that animals are not supposed to be party to the arrangements by which Christ is said to have redeemed mankind. You will have to ask Watchtower for the reasoning behind this, and to what extent the rules apply. Would a witness zookeeper be forced to find alternative employment if asked to feed unbled meat to the lions? Would a witness biologist be liable for disassociation if he unrepentantly breeds mosquitoes or leeches for release into the wild? The hypothetical scenarios are almost endless. I've been reading to you from my book, The Reluctant Apostate, again, published in 2017, just to show you the relevant parts that I'm quoting from in the correspondence guidelines. I've prepared in this PDF the relevant pages of said guidelines, and this being a live stream, I do just want to quickly check the live chat and see that everything's in order. Yeah, I think everything's going fine. No technical issues as yet. So nice to see so many, by the way. 222 right now across YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So here we are. This page that we're looking at now is the correspondence guidelines. Again, a document that is used inside the correspondence department at Bethel's, so that when you write in with a question, they have something to go off if it's an issue that they feel strongly about. So you can see here, I'm going to highlight it. That's the part that I quote in The Reluctant Apostate. I won't read it again, but you can see there I've quoted it verbatim, that if you're a nurse or doctor and you're ordered to administer a blood transfusion to a non-witness, it's a conscience decision, meaning that you won't get into trouble if your conscience moves you to effectively do your job. And here also on the same page, here's the part about animals, which it still makes me chuckle. I mean, it shouldn't make me chuckle because the blood teaching obviously kills people. But what does make me chuckle is the extraordinary and ridiculous nuances to the blood teaching. It is not proper for a Christian to administer a blood transfusion to an animal owned by him or to authorize another to do so. And they cite there the 1964 Watchtower, February 15th. So I'm showing you this just to kind of cover all my bases, because I realize that some watching this may be believing Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're learning about what their own religion teaches for the first time. Now, if it makes you feel any better, I didn't know that this teaching about doctors and nurses had changed until last year when I ordered I'm looking, I shouldn't watch the live chat. Someone's talking about ordering Chinese food. Stay focused, Lloyd. This is a serious subject. So right up until last year, I just assumed that the material I discussed in The Reluctant Apostate was still up to date. And bear in mind, when you write about Jehovah's Witnesses, you're writing about a moving target. The religion is changing all the time, and it's infuriating. Right now, I am already working on my second edition, so there's a whole bunch of stuff I will need to update. But right up until last year, I assumed this, what I've just shared with you, to still be the case. That was until I did an interview, and I interviewed a recently defected Bethelite who had worked on the Hospital Information Services desk. His name was Daniel Graves, and I'm now going to show you the relevant part of our discussion.
As I came in late 2017, there was a concerted effort by Mark Sanderson, who in Nova Scotia was on the HLC and then worked at Hospital Information Services throughout the 90s doing medical research before he went to service department, then Gilead, then Philippines, and then he came back on the service committee. But he was trying to make a more proactive restructuring of HID. So in the summer of 2018, there was a new light about the staffing guidelines for hospital information departments, and then also making hospital information, what they were called before was desk. So it would be in the service department. But now we're taking that out and we're giving it a department name. And now you can expand your personnel, and we're to be more proactive, harder hitting, go out and hit the pavement. And then there was also a new light on doctors and nurses that are Jehovah's Witnesses when giving a blood transfusion. And so the previous understanding was that Jehovah's Witnesses that were doctors or nurses could, in their own conscience, it would be something that they would have to figure out, either aid in a blood transfusion or order or prescribe a blood transfusion for a particular patient that was a non-believer. But now, in the summer of 2018, the idea is, and this was with no scriptural backing, all they said was abstain from blood in Acts.
And it's actually in the correspondence guidelines, I think, that you wouldn't be penalized if you were, say, a nurse and you were instructed by a doctor to administer a blood transfusion.
Yeah, previously. And then now the idea was that is objectionable, and that is so closely linked to an unscriptural practice that has no bearing on your employment at the facility. So if you had to be terminated or go to a different section of the hospital and work in a different role, that's something that you have to do now.
Okay, so that was the relevant part of my conversation with Daniel Graves. Again, at that time a recently defected Bethelite from the Woolkill facility. My mind's a bit foggy, and sometimes I get Warwick and Woolkill confused. So the Woolkill Bethel, and Daniel worked on the Hospital Information Services desk. And what he's describing there was news to me when I did the interview. As you can see from my comments, I say, well, you know, it's in the correspondence guidelines that doctors and nurses can administer blood. And Daniel corrects me and says, well, it used to be the case, but in 2018 we had a letter that changed everything. And, you know, I wasn't going to question him because, you know, the guy clearly knows what he's talking about. But it did frustrate me that they could make such a fundamental or far-reaching change to the blood teaching without there being any paper trail, without there being anything shared with the rank and file. Well, guess what? Daniel's information that he shared has since been corroborated by an extremely brave HLC insider who is sharing information with JW Watch. And we can now look at the letter. Would you like to do that? So let's go back to this PDF that I've prepared. And if we scroll to the next page, you'll see Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. Let me just check to see that's displaying properly. In fact, I'm just going to alter the display a little bit just so you can see the letter a bit more clearly. There we go. And I'm going to read it. June 15th, 2018, to all Hospital Liaison Committee members. Notice it doesn't say to all publishers, to all congregations. You have to be a HLC member to read this letter. Administering a blood transfusion when directed by a superior. Dear brothers, we would like to inform you of an updated policy with regard to whether a Christian may administer a blood transfusion if he is directed to do so by a superior. The previous policy was that it would be a matter for personal, conscientious decision whether to obey such an order. However, after carefully reviewing the matter, the governing body has determined that administering such a transfusion is so closely linked with an unscriptural practice that one unquestionably becomes an accomplice in a wrong practice. Therefore, it would not be appropriate for a Christian to administer a blood transfusion under any circumstance. Almost verbatim the way Daniel described the letter in our interview. No scriptures cited. Well, it does cite a scripture. Let's just look it up. I know what Acts 15 will say. I just want to refresh my memory on what Genesis 9 verse 4 says. I'm pretty sure it doesn't say anything about doctors and nurses. Genesis 9 verse 4, only flesh with its life, its blood, you must not eat. So, like he said, no scripture to back up this thought that because it's so closely linked with an unscriptural practice, it becomes an unscriptural practice by default. Which, if you think about it, is a lot like what they criticize the Pharisees and Jewish religious leaders in Jesus' day for doing, putting up a fence around the law. So the law alone wasn't sufficient. We need to create a whole other set of laws to stop people getting even close to breaking one of the laws. So that's a remarkable paragraph. And what also stood out to me before we even move on in the letter it says, however, after carefully reviewing the matter, what? Now we've decided to carefully think about this, you know? Does this mean that the blood teaching or any elements thereof haven't been carefully thought about? You know, what other parts of the blood teaching do you need to carefully review or carefully think about? So, remarkable wording that clearly was not intended for any kind of scrutiny. Scrutiny that it's receiving finally now that we can all read it. A Christian who is a nurse or a doctor respects the scriptures and therefore would not recommend, order, or administer a blood transfusion. How a brother or sister will handle matters so as not to violate the scriptures would be something to decide personally. Oh, you get at least some personal jurisdiction here. Bearing responsibility for the consequences of that decision. The possibility that a penalty might be imposed for non-compliance with orders from a superior would not be justification for a witness to break God's law. So it might cost you your job refusing to do the transfusion, but tough, you would be breaking God's law. We've just decided, no scriptures cited. So therefore, non-compliance, you know, there's no choice in the matter. What if a witness who is an employee and is not responsible for deciding the matter is directed by a superior to draw blood for a test or to carry out other routine services for a non-witness blood transfusion patient? The witness can make a personal, conscientious decision whether to obey. Oh, that's gracious of them. We'll let you decide for yourself if it's anything involving blood that isn't a transfusion. Oh, thank you for your latitude there. You may inform witness, doctors, and nurses of this decision. So the letter itself isn't to be handed to them, understandably, because it's embarrassing. It doesn't give any scriptures. It indicates that they've only now given it careful thought. They're not allowed to actually see the letter. They're just to be informed about the decision, which, again, as Daniel correctly observed, is new light. New light that is being kept from ordinary rank and file witnesses. Please be assured of our warm Christian affection. How was that ever in doubt? Your brother's Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses Hospital Information Desk. So yes, that is the 2018 June 15th letter that Daniel was alluding to in our interview. Again, it was totally news to me when he brought it up. But isn't it nice that his version of events has been corroborated with an actual document? I did seriously consider making a PDF link, download link available, but you must understand, just to preempt all of the people asking for one, that Watchtower is incredibly litigious, and I run the risk of breaching copyright or being pursued over breach of copyright if I do anything other than what I've already done, which is comment on the letter under fair use provisions in a video. If I make the letter available in, say, the description, well, that's a bit different. That could conceivably get me into trouble. So I'm going to protect the channel, if you don't mind. But yeah, I'm not going to say any more than that. But hopefully you can see, I mean, I've clearly not made this up. This is a legit letter that was sent out in 2018. Let's just take some of the comments. I'll take that down. Lilia Benavides says, I had a hysterectomy some time ago. Let me tell you, I changed my mind about the blood issue pretty quick after the nurse spoke to me. I had a small child then. Yeah, this is, I think, what gets missed quite a lot when, particularly when the organisation is discussing this issue. They just assume that all Jehovah's Witnesses will fall in lockstep with what's expected of them. But when your life's on the line, or the life of your child is on the line, or both, who knows what decision you're going to make, you know? And if it's truly a personal decision, you should be able to make a personal decision without any kind of interference by any HLC goons. So I'm really, really glad that that you managed to reach the right decision in that situation, it seems. Jamie Parker says, I never was a Jehovah's Witness. I just find this all very important and interesting. This bit of information right here is wild. Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Yeah, the fact that there's a rule for Jehovah's Witness doctors and nurses, a rule that was introduced as recently as 2018, and the only people who are allowed to have any kind of evidence about this rule change are HLC elders. They are the only ones. Or people working in the hospital information services who basically provide support to HLCs. Jay says the entire religion is presented as no choice. Babies are enemies of God. So you must get baptized or die, take blood or disassociate. Yes, Jay is referring to the words of Stephen Lett at the 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. One or two have been asking, when are you going to be covering it, Lloyd? Believe me, it's in my pending tray. I just wanted to get the Gilead coverage done. I've finished filming that today, and then I'll be getting stuck in to the convention rebuttals. Jason Wright says, no blood transfusion, then now they have a choice. How many died who had a choice but was told they didn't? I think this is ultimately the reason, Jason, why there won't be any new light lifting the blood prohibition entirely. Because once you've actually taken lives as a result of your teaching, once the first person dies, you then need to explain their death if you do a U-turn. So I actually think it's doubtful that we will ever see, unfortunately, the blood transfusion teaching aborted or lifted. But I hope that medical advances will come to the rescue, and it's promising to see advances with artificial blood, which should be acceptable to Jehovah's Witnesses once it's available, and I think that will end up coming to the rescue. But that will be thanks to science. It won't be thanks to any miraculous intervention. Free Your Mind says, thank you for exposing this. Amen. Deborah Armstead says, I was told I might have a heart condition, went to a specialist and had tons of tests, decided I no longer wanted to be a witness and have my non-believing husband pay for non-blood medical doctors. You said have your non-believing husband pay for non-blood medical doctor, but you decided you wanted to not be a witness. Okay, well, it sounds like one way or the other you're here to tell the tale, but isn't it sad that you even had to make this decision, or felt like you had to, abandon your faith over what is a medical choice? Tower Dom says, Lloyd, were JW nurses and doctors aware that they were not liable if under instruction Surely if they continue doing it now, they are excused as they are not aware of the new light. Well, in the letter, it says at the end, you may inform witness doctors and nurses of this decision. It's interesting, actually, it doesn't say you must inform witness doctors and nurses of this decision. It almost leaves it up to the discretion of the HLC if they have any doctors or nurses in their area that they cover. So yeah, even that's odd wording at the end, but you would hope that, you know, reading between the lines, that HLC elders would make sure, you'd hope, that all JW doctors and nurses know what the latest understanding is. Although in this case, the latest understanding is a regression, isn't it? It's making things worse. It's potentially impacting on not just the healthcare of Jehovah's Witnesses, but the healthcare of non-Jehovah's Witnesses. Because in medical situations, you know, seconds can count, can't they? And if you've got a nurse or a doctor whose job it is to provide or issue a blood transfusion, and they, on the spur of the moment, say, no, I can't do this, who knows what a difference that few seconds could take for them to sort out who's going to administer the blood transfusion. So yeah, I'm glad you asked that, by the way. Isn't it disturbing? Oh dear, that's so typical, isn't it? Yes, it is, unfortunately. You know, again, really, really sloppy wording. Chelsea Peterson says, I knew as a child I was lied to and watched my grandfather counsel this friend's parents to obey Jehovah and deny her blood transfusions. Els Bells says, growing up, many sisters were nurses in my congregation, so they would have to change careers. True, nowadays, or as of June 2018, when Jehovah saw fit to inspire the governing body to carefully review this. It's taken that long since the faithful slave was appointed in 1919. It's taken 99 years for them to come to a conclusive decision on this particular issue. Astonishing, isn't it? I am new in this channel and I like your information. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. That's kind of you to say. Jamie Parker says, so are letters like these considered new light too? Well, new light is anything that changes the status quo in terms of the teachings and theology or the organizational procedures and policies. So yes, I agree with Daniel when he described in his interview, he described this as new light. This is definitely categorized as new light because it's making a change to an existing teaching or policy and claiming that something that used to be down to a person's individual conscience now no longer is. Now there's no choice. There's no workaround. Liana Fredrickson says, my sister passed away on the 19th of August 2018 after being diagnosed with leukemia, and elders told her no blood transfusions. I'm so sorry, Liana. So this is something that has impacted on you very personally, and I'm sure you're not the only one, bearing in mind that there will be others watching this video. And, you know, I try not to think about this subject too much because it's depressing, but that you've just demonstrated and you've reminded all of us, you know, the hundreds of people currently watching and any who will watch, that this is a life or death matter. And again, in the case of this particular change, it's potentially impacting on the healthcare even of non-Jehovah's Witnesses, isn't it? Autumn Depot Hughes, hope I've correctly pronounced your name, says, what will happen to all of those old cards in wallets that were given out by the organisation telling medical providers to refuse transfusions? Well, this doesn't impact on the overall blood teaching. The advanced directives, I'm sure, are completely unaffected by this. This is more to do with Jehovah's Witnesses, who are doctors and nurses and who are directed by their superiors to administer blood to non-Jehovah's Witness patients. The advanced directives, unfortunately, will stay in people's wallets and lead to deaths. And in the same interview, Daniel actually said that when I pressed him on what the number was for the 3.5 years that he was on the Hospital Information Services desk, I pressed him for a ballpark on what the body count was for the blood teaching, and he wouldn't give a precise number, but he said it was in the thousands. So thousands of deaths in just the 3.5 years that he was noticing the emails come through. So it really is chilling. So yeah, I'm wondering, I've said pretty much everything I have to say on this. All that really remains is to, leave this information in your hands. And if there are people that need to see this information, perhaps you have Jehovah's Witness friends or relatives who you can respectfully direct to this information if you feel it's pertinent. Apart from the whole issue of personal choice, what does it say about an organization if they are keeping their changes so secret, important changes to their teachings? David Miller Kohlmeyer says, I do feel like the blood issue is an example of the society painting itself in a corner. They can't drop it now. Like you said, too many have already died. For me, I started to waver on it when I became aware how many treatments using fractions were a conscience issue, and the hypocrisy on that made me start to question the whole thing. Seriously, David, the blood teaching is like Swiss cheese. It's absolutely full of holes. It's absolutely full of contradictions. I've discussed many of them on this channel. There's a video I did, I think it was 10 things Jehovah's Witnesses should know about blood transfusions. One of them is to do with hemoglobin, and I discussed this in The Reluctant Apostate. Hemoglobin is pretty much red blood cells. A red blood cell, an RBC, or leukocyte, is a disc of hemoglobin wrapped in just a disc, like a shell. It's, even as a cell in the body, unique in that it's lost its nucleus. It's not a typical kind of cell. It doesn't have a nucleus. It's literally just a disc of hemoglobin, and in their ridiculous teaching, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that you can receive hemoglobin, but you can't receive a red blood cell. Isn't that ridiculous? So hemoglobin is the thing that makes it a red blood cell. It literally makes it red, and it is the protein that carries oxygen around your body. It's kind of one of the most important elements of or particles in your blood. And you can receive the hemoglobin, but you can't receive it in its natural form, in its natural wrapper. And another big contradiction for me is the fact that the four components, that they're not really considered this way by the medical community. It just so happens that if you put blood in a centrifuge and spin it separates into 4 layers. So it separates into red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and platelets. But they're not thought of by medical professionals as the four main components. That's just how blood responds in a centrifuge. But the organization's obsessed with this idea of banning those four main components, including white blood cells, and white blood cells everyone drinks when they have some milk. When you pour your milk on your cornflakes in the morning, you're drinking the white blood cells of a cow. And babies, when they're receiving their mother's breast milk, particularly immediately after birth or in the days after the birth, the mother's breast milk is teeming with white blood cells from the mother. So it's completely full of holes, the blood teaching. And the really tragic thing, as we were reminded of earlier, is that it's not just a convoluted and nonsensical teaching, it's also a deadly teaching, something that literally kills people. And it seems that the organization can tweak it and make changes to it without anyone being informed. Even the letter affecting Jehovah's Witness doctors and nurses doesn't insist on Jehovah's Witness doctors and nurses being informed. It just says you may, if you want to, if you're feeling up to it, and you know any Jehovah's Witness doctors or nurses, feel free to let them know. But don't show them this letter. Just tell them our decision. So yes, that's more or less everything. I wanted to try and keep this video a bit shorter as well, because I'm mindful that if it's too long, people might not watch it. Just a quick update. I am, as I mentioned earlier, going to be doing my rebuttals to the 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. They will be going out over the remainder of July and August, and I guess into September maybe. I just wanted to clear my desk and get the Gilead rebuttal finished, because I'm a little bit, OCD like that. I like to do everything in its proper order. Many thanks indeed to the 400 or so who've been tuning in across YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. I hope you found this information interesting, and please do share it with as many people as you can, because this is important information. But that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's live stream and indeed watching it after the fact. Don't forget that you can watch similar videos by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel, but that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, everyone.